Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your nibbles and managed to get a quick drink and loo break. So earlier you heard the results from our latest report, and we're now going to explore some of those themes with our panel, which will be expertly, I'm sure, moderated by the Editor-in-Chief of Computer Weekly, Bryan Glick. So I'd now like to welcome Bryan to the stage.
Thanks, Natalie. Morning, everybody. Or afternoon now. Get the technical facts right straight away. Afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here. Thank you to the team in Nash for inviting me to come along. We're going to have a really interesting discussion in a minute. I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, just to try and set the scene a little bit for you. Wasn't Benedict's talk great? Absolutely brilliant. If you don't read his stuff regularly online, do so. It's fantastic. The layer of common sense that he adds to all the hyperbole is absolutely outstanding. Now, perhaps like him, the nature of my job is that I end up having to spend a lot of time reading various hyperbolic Substack posts by Silicon Valley developers and investors and all this sort of thing. And when you read these things, there's a couple of things that they all have in common. One is they're all in an ongoing attempt to rewrite the rules of prose in the English language. They're all full of sentences with full stops after every word. You know, this, full stop, changes, full stop, everything. All of these sort of things there. Most often these are seen in things like, you know, to pick up on something Benedict said as well. Things like, wow, I just asked my LLM to code SAP for me, and it did it. This changes everything. And then, you know, a week later, somebody else writes a Substack post saying, yeah, of course, he wrote SAP, but then it went and deleted his company's 20 years of financial history, and they've now gone bankrupt. But that's another matter. The other thing that's common to most of these hyperbolic sort of Silicon Valley blog posts is the people who write them don't get out very much. And they don't understand the messy, complex reality of how software and IT is used in enterprises around the world. In the companies that are running the technology, that runs the world. You know, they don't get out to see how badly integrated systems are. They don't get out to see how poorly integrated even off-the-shelf software can be. They don't get out to see how siloed and fragmented data across organizations are. They're sort of stuck in a bit of a mindset that everybody in the world thinks like a Silicon Valley developer. We know that's not the case. So what we want to do, having heard this morning about the survey results that give you a snapshot of how people are thinking about it around custom software, and having heard from Benedict, who's given a picture of the future and how to predict or sometimes not predict the future, what we want to do is give you an opportunity to hear from some people who are at the coalface today and find out what is the actual messy reality of implementing custom software today and how is AI affecting that. So to do that, we've got 4 fantastic panelists, each coming from a very different perspective on the same issue. So I think you'll get some really interesting opinions around this. First of all, you've already seen him this morning, George Lynch from NashTech. George, as you know, Director of NashTech Advisory and lead author of the new report. George, please come up and join us. Alongside George, we have Nigel Phillips. Nigel is the Chief Executive of CDL Software. CDL is a long-established provider of insurance platforms. He's transformed CDL's core systems, and he's bringing a perspective both from an independent software company and a CEO on what's going on. Nigel, please come and join us as well.
Lovely fun, me.
Bringing us an end-user IT decision-maker perspective, we've got Michelle Ripley. Michelle is IT Director at Third Space. The fittest among you will know that Third Space is a premium health club operator. Maybe some of you are going there later today. Who knows? Have a word with Michelle. But she's going to bring that enterprise perspective on custom software and implementing AI in the real world. Michelle, please come up as well. And as it's compulsory to say, last but by no means least, is Azhar Sadique. Azhar is Global Head of AI Enablement, the law firm Abion, and Chairman of the Chartered Institute of Trademark Attorneys. And he's going to bring a perspective of, you know, real life, introducing AI into a law firm, a highly regulated environment, and some of the governance issues that go around that. Azhar, please come join us too. So, thank you all for coming up here. I hope you're happy with me pitching you as the people who know exactly what's really going on in the world at the moment and have all the answers that you're going to share with people here. So let's pick up, first of all, then, on some of the themes that George talked about this morning. And probably the overriding one, and this is the overriding thing that I see whenever I'm talking to people like you, to CIOs, IT leaders, companies, everybody says, yeah, AI is a top priority. We're doing AI. We want to do AI. We're into AI. We're all doing AI. But then when you start to ask them the question about, okay, well, what are you using it for? Well, we've got a couple of little pilots and trials here, and maybe we're using it a bit in the call center, and perhaps we've introduced a chat bot. But yeah, we're going to get into it, and it's going to be really big for us. The common experience seems to be there's a big step between wanting to do AI and trying with it and playing with it and scaling it up to become a production-ready application that really will bring some benefit to your business. So what I want to explore with you first, what's the first step you have to take? How do you make sure at the start that when you've got AI as a priority, that you're doing the right things that's going to allow you to actually put that into production and execute and get some real benefits from it? For this first question, I'll start the furthest end from me, Nigel. Why don't you tell us what you think on that one?
Yeah, I think what we observe from internally and from the market, from our customers, is that often people look to put together a proof of concept, and if you cannot scale that, if you cannot roll that out and roll that out everywhere, then it becomes a real problem. The reason why we see that there is a differentiator between getting a POC out there and actually becoming much more holistically AI native is the fact that it's not just the tech team in an organization that needs to be experienced or educated. It's actually everybody. And what we notice pretty sort of fundamentally is that we see a lot of individuals, a lot of organizations, the regulators, the governments, the EU, putting in place a stop. We cannot progress with this. There are rules, there are fears, there are worries. And the analogy I typically use is that, the dam wall has broken and there is a torrent coming towards the individuals, the organizations, the governments that are all standing there, watching the torrent head towards them, putting their hand up to say, you can't come past me. And clearly, that's not going to work very well. For us, the way that we look at our organization and we talk to our sort of customers and we operate in the insurance sector, is that actually the reality is that you need to get everybody in the organization to start building some kayaks, get on the water, get some paddles, and go downstream with it. Of course, there's going to be some casualties. And I think there's a fundamental difference to having, small segments of your organization operating these small POCs rather than a holistic view of, how do we take advantage of what's clearly, a significant change. There's a new era utilizing AI. As we've just heard from Benedict, I think we don't know what the outcome is or perhaps how all of our roles are going to change and transition. But certainly if you imagine for, buying insurance software, insurance products rather, that actually, nobody particularly likes to ring a call center. Nobody particularly likes to go and complete long web forms several times a year for several products. Consumers, I think, and we've looked at some of the stats, there might only be 5 or 6%, of consumers that have started to understand what AI or agentic technology can offer to simplify the process. But when it becomes 50 or 60%, then there's a big difference. So for us, we see that the transition has got to be everywhere by everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think the education piece, regulatory, both really examples of a response to the fear of change as much as anything. Moving down the line, Azhar, you are ahead of AI enablement, so you are clearly enabling AI on a daily basis. How have you overcome these, the King Canute GPTs of the world who are trying to stop all this happening.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks, Nigel. Also for Benedict, on his slide there, it was he seems to have got sandwiched between Northerners again. The other element on there was, what about those lawyers? Well, I'm one of those as well, so I get a double whammy. Well, it's a strange one because I do, for the UK government, we advise law firms on AI enablement, and it sounds like a very complicated term, but actually, going back to your question, for me, it's about acceptance first. And Nigel, very philosophically placed it as, get in your canoe and go downstream, which is quite a Bruce Lee comment, be like water. But if you approach everything from a place of fear at the beginning, you're only going to get more. And what we've seen, especially in a regulated industry like law, is not about the governance. That's actually the second stage. It's not about the fear. It's about the acceptance before that. So the governance and frameworks are already alien to a lot of regulated professions. And I think what we found, or I found to be really helpful, is it's the point of explaining how something that is as old as law, the provision of a service that's regulated, adopts into a new technology that is not going away. And in the discussions with the government, we have everybody available to us. So we have the SRA, we have my governing body, IPREG, which is another body that rules trademark and patent attorneys. So throughout my entire career, I've dealt with intellectual property. We're always at the start. That could be for software, could be for brands. Everything needs a name, and everything needs to be protected. But very weirdly, we don't take the innovation concept. We're very good at defining technologies as lawyers in the IP space, but we're very bad at using them. But rather than define our own regulations and our own frameworks in a way that works for us, I think it's really easy to see that it comes down to the bottom line, and is this going to affect business? And then it's actually not about any of the governance frameworks. They have to actually say, what do we have to accept first? And that's happening more. We're seeing it more. But legal tech's obviously flying quite quickly in tools that sort of deal with the diagnosis and not the cure. So I think we're right in between the bubbles that Benedict mentioned, actually, as a profession. And figuring that out is deciding how to define these frameworks and governance points. But it always starts with that acceptance level, I think, for me.
And Michelle, you're at the heart of this messy reality of running IT in a growing business at the moment, facing, I'm sure, these daily things of why isn't it working, and where's my data when I need it. What's the reality for you on the ground in an enterprise like that of trying to introduce AI to make it work across the organisation, to balance where it fits with your needs for custom software?
Sure. I mean, at Thurspace, we're not regulated, unlike insurance, lawyers, so maybe we're a little bit more freedom, except for GDPR and other regulations. Mm-hmm. But I kind of see AI in different shapes and sizes. So we have SaaS. There's lots of AI baked into those SaaS products, whether it's cybersecurity tooling, whether it's looking at a CCAS software with sentiment analysis, call monitoring through AI. Then the next kind of bucket of AI for us is internal business automation, looking at Power Automate, low-code, no-code applications. How does that make us more productive, more efficient? And we're really free to experiment and really get to grips with that kind of efficiency aspect. Then there's custom development. This is great opportunity with AI. Can development go quicker? Can we do automation testing quicker? Can we do business analysis even better? And then obviously that opens up a re-architecture of legacy systems, which is really, really exciting. Not there yet, but that is something we're considering. But I think the harder piece, and the more messier piece, is picking those business problems and really kind of homing in on those and building small proof of concepts around those and building actually product team leadership and owning those AI use cases end to end and proving out the value. Not always do we prove out the value. We've even had some areas where we've done some machine learning, creating an overbooking concept to allow more members to come to class. And that hasn't necessarily proved out quite what we wanted to do, but that's okay. We had huge learnings from that. So I think, it can either be really successful, and once it is, you can then scale it. And if it's not, that's okay too. We have to be prepared to do proof of concept and invest in that strategy. That's where we are.
I think if any of the generative AI firms are listening, if they can come up with a model that allows you to plug into your corporate IT and just type in the phrase, please replace all my legacy systems, then they're going to make a lot of money out of that, I'm sure. George, you listening to these three different perspectives here, you're out talking to people every day about what they're doing here. You know, what's the messy reality that you're seeing, and how are people making this step from I want it to actually using it?
Yeah, and As made a point about acceptance. So there used to be a phrase we used quite a lot 10 years ago, which was data literacy. Everybody understand their role in managing business data. I think part of acceptance comes with education, so about AI literacy. So I spend a lot of time kind of trying to upskill SLTs or even IT teams on what we mean by AI and what it means today. Remember, AI has been around as a term since the 1950s. But we've currently got this AI-shaped hammer looking for an AI-shaped nail to hammer. And in fact, when we talk to lots of clients, the answer is, well, that's just like process improvement. That's traditional machine learning. That's just automation. These are all completely valuable and valid things to do. And you had mentioned earlier about scaling. How do you scale? So you need to think about total cost of ownership, right? So why are the hyperscalers investing heavily in AI? Because they want you to use as many tokens as humanly possible, and therefore you have to manage. You have to really understand what is the total cost of improving that business process through generative or agentic AI. And hey, if the sums match up, go for it, right? But and this is my last comment on this one. Generative and agentic AI have not thrown good computing science out the window. In fact, good computer science is at the heart of everything we do, and therefore you should apply the same engineering principles to everything you do in the AI space.
One of the things that Benedict made, which I think is very relevant here as well, is this. One of the topics of conversation is always look at what's happened before. Look at nothing. Yes, this is something new, but also there's nothing new under the sun. We've experienced these things, sort of things before. That was one of the things that came from your research that I thought illustrated that quite nicely. In my career as a tech journalist, writing, about too many big government IT cock-ups and the like has been a repeating pattern. There was this fantastic data point, I've got it written down here, said 62% of senior leaders say recent software outcomes exceeded expectations, while only 39% of mid-managers said the same thing. There is still a perception gap very much there between the people who are on the ground making these technologies work, and this filtering process up to the top of the organisation, where nobody wants to be the one that goes to the top of the organisation and says, actually, yeah, we've just spent £10 million on this and it doesn't work, sorry, we need to start again. How does that disconnect relate, and what can we learn from that disconnect going forward to make sure that we're not going to repeat, that we can learn from the past and not repeat the same mistakes going forward? Azhar, let me come to you first.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And actually, with the stats you put on the slides earlier with George and Chris's session, it directly correlates to some research that the government did about supervision. And they did a survey on regulated professionals, lawyers, accountants, financial sector. And the response back was that 60 to 7% of supervising managers feel like they don't have the skills available to teach their staff. And the junior staff, an overwhelming majority of them agreed and said, we don't think we have the supervisors to prepare us for the job of the future, not the current job, which I thought was an interesting way of defining that statistic. Because just going back to the education point, that's the problem. It's moving so quickly. You can't rely on the relationships of hierarchy anymore, which these institutions are based upon. In theory, the only way you can deal with it, as you guys both said, is by realizing partnerships are the way to adopt additional knowledge. Lawyers have got egos. They like to think they can learn everything themselves anyway, but this is not about that. This is about progression of something. You can also, no business can suddenly say, well, let's just turn the lights off for a minute whilst we all get up to speed on AI. You have to learn how to maneuver and move on the go and be versatile. And the education piece is actually missing, because what do you need to learn as a lawyer for safe use of AI? That's not in the textbooks. There's no textbook in the Inns of Court that says AI is naughty, the judge will say, is this citation correct? So it's you as a user, and it's your own integrity to challenge those leadership channels. But I think it is getting better. What we've realized is, though, it's very industry specific. And in order to understand your industry, you need to understand the context of AI applied to your industry. And at the moment, there's not many of those. Hence why the partnerships work. And we've been doing a lot of that on both the government and my company level to make sure our users understand what ethical use is, not just about business use, but how are you going to, it's quite a lawyer thing to say, but how are we going to stop ourselves from being sued by ourselves? It's quite a unique legal question to solve. But we're still on the early stages with it, so we're just sort of navigating that channel, really.
Mm. Michelle, I'm sure if I went and talked to all the mid-managers in your organisation, they would say, yes, absolutely, delivery meets expectations every time. But maybe, as you've seen in other organisations, this sort of mismatch sometimes between expectation and delivery and the hopes and the messy reality. What's your experience been of how to balance that out?
We're probably a bit more of a smaller SMB organisation, so a bit more nimbler, agile, bringing people together, and I think that's really key, having all the parties together, even leadership, and bring them on that journey. It's not about program status reports, it's actually, demoing, looking, does this product work, does it fit, is everyone aware of it, pick it apart, and really look and come on that journey together, and then I think it's much quicker to get to the end.
Mm. Nigel, you are the boss. You are the CEO. So presumably you have your perspective is completely different from everybody that works from you. You have no idea what's really going on.
I thought he was always right.
Yeah.
For me, I think that if you look at what I, sort of politically call a traditional sort of development life cycle, there's often a great period of time. Certainly in a traditional waterfall method. Certainly can also be quite a period of time in an agile sort of method. And I think what probably happens, and the reason for the differentiation in the results between what the exec think, what the sort of management think, is that over that period of time, if the metrics haven't been clearly defined or got altered because change happened in that intervening period, then it's kind of inevitable that there's different context. I would expect that what was originally asked for is what we're getting. The reality is that it's probably moved on some way. So I think the relevance of, trying to introduce, AI to speed up the process, to change the way that sort of methodology that could be used to, have a much more creative idea about what is actually needed, what consumers actually want at the end point, and the ability to deliver that, quickly and effectively in a bespoke sort of fashion. I think the shorter that period, then the more likely you would get those two stats joining up. Certainly, I think that AI, and my perspective is AI can deliver much more significant metric benefits, both in terms of, operational efficiency. It's 10 times more efficient or cheaper to operate, or perhaps, or as well, it could result in, 10x growth as well. So when you have those two clear metrics, then understanding whether the outcome is what you wanted in a shorter period, there might be a bit more harmonization.
George, I guess, your teams at NashTech probably have a foot in each of these camps. You're working with the people in the middle to make these things work, and you're relaying back to the senior leaders about how it's going. So I'm sure you're completely truthful with them at all times about the progress of the projects.
Well, I'll tell you for me, right, so I talk to chief execs a lot. In fact, I talk to CTOs and CIOs a lot. And the CTO and CIO say to me on a Monday morning, "Hey, George, I got a text from the CEO and he says he needs AI tomorrow," right? And poor CTO is going, "Well, what does that mean," right? So there's this there's both an education gap, as we talked about earlier, which is a perception of what is AI and what can it do. But the reality is, and what was mentioned earlier, but kind of an unprecedented point, I think, and I'll give you an example. If you think about Claude AI as one of the many tools that are out there, and the concept of context engineering, right? Talk about closing the gap. You can have a software engineer who has a very small coding window, but has full business context in front of them, and can use that to influence the code they will write. So rather than an engineer who's just a software engineer who's just interested in writing really good code, you've got a software engineer who's really interested in writing code that shifts the dial in business outcomes. Now, I mean, that is the first time in my working life where that's a possibility now. And that may then start to close the gap between perception and reality on the ground.
Let me come back to one of the issues. I think you've mentioned in particular, Azhar, but it's been a bit of a theme among all your answers, and this is the topic of governance. It's a common factor in moving from pilot to production. It's a common factor in different perceptions across the organisation often as well. And I see the topic of governance coming up more and more around AI now, both in terms of the fact because, as we heard earlier, it's probabilistic. How do you govern something that is probabilistic and might give you a different answer every time you ask it? And also, there's where we are getting a bit of this element now of people who are saying, governance. We have to think: are we doing this right? They're heretics. They're getting in the way. They don't understand. AI is going to change. AI is going to change the world. You're not going to need to worry about governance because the AI will do it. Will do it all for you. Now, again, we all know the messy reality of enterprise IT is it doesn't work that way. But AI is going to raise the stakes on this without a doubt, because potentially the data you're exposing it to and the services you're asking it to provide are absolutely fundamental to your organisation. So where do you start with governance? I've heard this phrase minimum viable governance used sometimes. Where do you find the minimum viable governance to make introducing AI into your software development a safe and secure thing to do? Michelle, I'll let you go first on this one.
I said we're not as regulated as others, but I would say the key messages there are around about data boundaries, data processing, data protection, security. Others are around the guardrails, whether it's third parties involved, making sure that they're not training on data, or just ensuring that governance is around that guardrail piece. Cost is really important with AI. We need to manage that. Also, any AI that we do or any kind of experiments we do is we have named owners, product owners that take accountability for the use case end to end. So they're the key. I'm oversimplifying it. There is a lot that goes into kind of the due diligence and everything that goes behind implementing and deploying. But I think there are some fundamental governance pieces. Yeah.
I mean, Nigel, you're selling into a highly regulated industry in insurance, a highly governance-oriented industry, arguably a bit of a slow adopter, perhaps, of technology at times in the past. So you must come across this question and this sort of barrier a lot. Yeah, we love to use AI, but show me it complies with our financial regulations, or we can't do anything.
Yeah, for sure. I think for us, regulation needs to be built in at the core, because there are a huge amount of elements that from the regulator in insurance, from banking, more generally in financial services, that you've got to make sure that those checks and balances across the board in terms of consumer data, from financial services regulations, they're all built in at the core. When you actually operate under that notion whereby if there's a human coding, testing, deploying, they have to comply and follow all of these written down procedures, rules. One of the advantages that you can take when implementing an AI process is that you can feed those documents, those rules into the machines to make sure that they adopt that style of operation. So that's one of the advantages, I think, one of the accelerators. Certainly when it ends up, in front of a customer, a consumer, whereby they're buying a product that there cannot be any wavering in terms of what they think they're buying, you've actually got to make sure that, you know, they verify that what has been disclosed, what's been looked up is correct. You know, you can build that into the process. So actually, to a greater extent, I think with AI, you can probably increase the level of scrutiny and governance because all of those logs, all of those activities are all collated together. The evidence of the process is all, you know, embedded, is at the core. And I think if you take that approach, then actually you'll probably end up with a much stronger proposition that you can evidence an audit, you know, during an audit. And I think, you know, it does take a bit of preparation. You know, for us, we probably spent the last 24 months doing that underlying, you know, those underlying sort of steps before you can actually deploy software out. But, you know, I'm sure the sort of compliance teams will have a field day in making sure that those steps have been followed and that there is quality. So I think it's an improvement.
Yeah. And, you know, Azhar, you've already touched on the fact, you know, governance and compliance is the heart of what you do on a daily basis. You know, from what you do would you say would be the key lesson that people in other organisations could take to make sure they get this governance question right?
Yeah, I think it's all of the same things really, the traceability, the segregation of data, the audit trail. But interestingly, just picking up on what George mentioned there, I'm going to sort of flip it the other way, because from the conversations we've had with law firms and accountants, is any other lawyers in the room, by the way? No way.
Oh, no, they're just not putting their hand up.
Yeah, I thought that. Well, my question was going to be, but nobody's here. How many lawyers measure ROI? They are the service. How many lawyers have a product launch? Or next week, so-and-so LLP is dropping this product? Never, ever. So actually, the analogy that George mentioned there is having a heart in a business for once. And I don't mean they're heartless, that's a terrible thing to say, but if you had something that was measuring, an analogy I've been using recently is law sort of like the back of the hand temperature test, and now we're getting a thermometer. You can't disprove the thermometer, but the back of the hand test is very subjective to that individual. So having the adoption internally is not so much about selling what the AI can do, it's about what can the governance reveal. And if you have somebody who's got a development mind, a scientific mind, a mind to measure and evaluate openly without an ego, they'll probably treat an enterprise like a business. And they'll first say, you went to New York, I've seen these receipts from 3 o'clock in the morning, you're in this club, you spent how much? Oh yeah, but I was sat next to the head of legal for Uber. All right, cool, no worries then, spend twice next time. It's not ROI of anything, it's not actually talking about AI. AI could solve that and look at a business of a law firm and say, you guys actually don't need AI. You need technology to understand the bottlenecks, first of all. And you're all segregated anyway, so you've all got these issues of silos. So I think the easier sell and how we've adopted technology, how we're encouraging law firms to adopt is, first of all, look at how you want to grow as a business. And the provision of law is lots of different things. It's a very valuable skill to a lot of people, but you can make it more accessible if you use technology. Yeah. So it's not so much about what's the entry point to governance. I think there's lots of different ways you could do it, but the more interesting one is if you can measure services in a very good way, you can suddenly realize how everyone can open up. And looking at Benedict's graphs there, we don't need to be worried, because if we're creating at the speed that we are, there's going to be more disputes, there's going to be more contracts, there's going to be more licensing. Actually, in the world, for what I do, there's only 1.4 million lawyers. If you think about the world of IP growing, it's predicted to grow by a factor of 50 in the next 3 years. We're not suddenly going to get 50 million lawyers. So we need to be 50 times more effective. And when you sell that in a C-suite room for a law firm, they realize how much is on the table for them to realize. So I like that framing, and I think that's a better way to prove the governance point.
Yeah. George, let me link from there onto my last question before I come to the audience. We're getting short on time, and I do want to give the audience a chance to put a couple of questions to the panel as well. So just for now, my last one, and then on to the others after this. And this picking up on Azhar's point there about ROI. You know, ROI means return on investment. It means something very different to different organisations. You know, exactly as you said there. When you're a lawyer, it means something. You know, what's the ROI of a lawyer? It means very different to very different organisations. And you know, we've heard from what Benedict has been talking about how much of this is the questions you ask is, well, we just don't know the answers to. And that's married at the same time with the big fear. The most, you know, a lot of employees listen to their company saying, we're investing in AI, and thinking, oh, well, that means my job's going then, doesn't it? There is this fear that the way they're going to justify the spend on AI is by getting rid of people. How you know, with all these different narratives around it, and I think there was some stuff in the survey around this as well, in terms of different priorities that different organisations have in terms of building ROI. What do you think is going to be different when it comes to AI and its role in custom software when trying to build the business case for doing this?
That's a good question. So you're talking about the value, the ROI and the justification for custom software development in and of itself in the age of AI.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Well, I don't know. I'm only kidding. So it's almost like, and we've talked about this as a group, right? You have to almost take AI out of the solution set a bit and just focus on the problem you're trying to solve as a business, and then look at whether or not AI is somewhat in the solution mix, as opposed to being the thing that you're going to solve the problems you don't know you have yet. So I think it's a pretty simple discussion with senior leaders that we've had quite a lot, and sort of reverse engineer it a bit. And I come back to the analogy of the AI as a hammer looking for a nail sometimes. It's about the involvement of the entire group of the organisation. There is a bit of an opportunity here, and it's a bit of a sideways thing, where AI and people's lack of knowledge of it is a bit of a level set of the playing field for the whole business. It's okay if the CEO doesn't know. It's okay if the software engineer doesn't know about AI. We're all on the learning journey together. I think that's probably going to help with some of the angst, particularly in the software engineering community, where they go, well, actually, I will have a role, to your point, as about we're not going to need less software engineers. We're going to probably have more, the same or more. So, and we're not seeing people vote with their feet. We're not seeing engineers wandering off to do something else. In fact, when we rolled out AI in our pilots, we kind of thought we could just withdraw it and study the results and come back. Our engineers said, don't take that off me. Right? You know, they saw the value in AI and doing the heavy lifting, the boring part of the job. But what I said earlier and others have said is, however, the software engineer is ultimately responsible for the code that's produced on their behalf, right? And that doesn't change. So AI is one of these kind of artificial disruptors, kind of, right? It causes people to think slightly differently when in fact they should just go back to basics. I know that's not a whole answer, but it's my view.
Yeah. Michelle, how do you approach ROI in the AI age in a growing business like yours?
Yeah, well, I've worked in many different gym operators across the world, and actually I'm going to give you a difference between the different sectors within the industry. So at the kind of budget sector or middle section, really ROI that would come from AI tools or implementation would be about reducing cost, because margins are really squeezed and you need to reduce that cost. So ROI has to pay back really quickly when you implement any tools like this. In a kind of scaling, growing business, actually, the equation kind of shifts into what about our member experience? That's really important. We have an NPS for our members, and that's really important that we keep that really high. But also, we have some really unique challenges, and happy for anyone to help us on this. But we have wait lists in all of our clubs, so you can join today, but you can't start today. So how can we shift the dial that allows more members to come in and experience our lovely offering and our lovely product without our clubs being overcrowded and creating dissatisfaction? So actually that's an important ROI. We actually have 3 peaks challenge. It's not climbing any mountains, but it's definitely a challenge for us, where we're busy in first thing in the morning, lunchtime and evening, but we have these off-peak times in the middle. How can we put more people that want to really join and really utilize our special club offering in those off-peak times? And then that's a win-win, but that increases our ROI. So Is that a data problem? Is it an AI problem? Don't know. We're trying to crack it. We're doing a lot of work in this space, but that's a real world, case for us. And that will bring dividends back if we can crack that ROI.
Yeah, I like that because it's looking at the ROI of an opportunity that you might have, which is a fantastic way to go. Which, in an ideal world, that's what you'd hope people were doing around digital transformation and AI generally. It's the opportunity that provides, not just the costs it can save. Yeah. Azhar, we know you can't put an ROI on a lawyer. How do you put an ROI on AI for lawyers?
Yeah, well, I think you have to sort of figure out what you're going to give up. And for me, it's about the validation of what you sell as a professional. And you can get that very quickly. You just need to ensure that you are empowering that individual to be a better version. I'll give them tools that allow them to. I don't think there's going to be a way of measuring ROI because the provision of law is going to be disrupted quite quickly. I'll give you an example. Now we're getting letters from clients that they want to send to the parties that they've drafted on ChatGPT or whatever tool. We're then spending the time to question that document and tell them why it's a bad idea, and then having to draft the document again. So before we get to an ROI now, we've got this, I call it validation tax. If it takes you a job plus 4 hours, it's probably not worth it. But there's many jobs that you don't need to take 4 hours for. And Nigel, what you were talking about is, it's actually those that have knowledge of being an operator, not the top level, not the senior people, those operatives that are down the pub having a conversation about why something's so terrible. That's where the real crown jewels are, because that's what you want to change. If a lot of people are moaning about an organisational shift or an administrative shift, probably solve that, and you won't need to worry about the actual thing that people are coming to spend money with you for. So there's ROI, and then there's this validation element that are kind of blending at the moment. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we haven't found a technology in legal yet that is the cure. It's more of fueling the diagnosis, which are two different things.
Nigel, round us off on this one.
Well, I think the phrase ROI will probably disappear. In particular with AI, I think there'll be a new 3-letter acronym, and I think it will be ELE, which is Extinction Level Event. I think that's, investing in what is going to come, and trying to visualize what that will be, how we need to transition. I think it's really not thinking about what that return's going to be. I think this is a matter of survival. And if you don't have that mindset of, is this going to make my organization or sector go extinct, then you've probably not thought about it enough. And I think there will become an entirely different framework, which seems a bit fantastical, but I think that's the reality. And I think the pace of change, I think the capability, the changing consumer behavior as a consequence of all of these new tools, these new capabilities, I think we have to start with this new ELE.
Yeah, nice way to round it off. I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. We've got a fantastic panel here with a real amazing range of experiences. So please do take advantage of them being here. Has anybody got any questions either for individual panels or for the panels as a whole? There's a first hand I saw was right at the back there. Whoever has the microphone.
This is an angle of ROI that's related to the built-in obsolescence of the technology. So it's sustainability. You've got a model of ChatGPT being withdrawn this month. It's less than 2 years old because it was too cuddly. So you've got vast investments, all of this ROI thinking, but how is it being mitigated in terms of the obsolescence, the lifespan of this technology? Is there anything around that at the moment?
I could have a go at that one.
You do?
So that's a really good question. In fact, a lot of the discussions we have with clients at the moment is about they're worried about placing bets on particular technologies due to that sort of fast fashion problem we've got just now, which is you might invest in a particular model and 6 months later it's completely outstripped by others. The reality is you have to now bake into your ROI model, and you're probably going to have to change things every 6 months in the AI space. You have to bake that into your actual cost model and not say, hey, because we used to have fairly, ERPs. You could buy an ERP for 10 years and you wouldn't get sacked for that. But now you will get sacked if you do make long-term commitments to particular hyperscalers, particular vendors, particular model providers, because the world will move on very fast. So my answer is really you need to bake in cost again and again and again, and use that in your ROI calculations.
I think it's a brilliant question. I think that typically for any software deployment, there's a consideration as to what the duration of usefulness, helpfulness of that particular technology. You might have done that investment over 5 years. It might be 5 days, 5 months. I think the timescales are dropping, and I think that new way of thinking needs to operate on a much more, regular cycle or shorter cycle. I don't think that's, what happens at the moment, but I think we need to consider that.
Okay, thank you. One more question? No? Oh, I'm being told no, so sorry. So if you have any burning questions, grab the panel over lunch, because it's your lunch coming up next. I'll hand back to Natalie in a moment, but in the meantime, your panel have been sharing some fantastic experiences of the real life world of AI and custom software and how the two are coming together at the moment. So a very big thank you to George Lynch, to Michelle Ripley, to Azhar, Sadique, and to Nigel Phillips, and your appreciation for the panel, please.
Oh, you're okay. Sit there for a minute. It's absolutely fine. They can look at your lovely faces. Just want to say a really big thank you as well to Bryan, expertly moderated, as we knew it would be. Yeah, so thank you so much. Really, really good. It is lunchtime. There is lunch downstairs. Also, your next session is breakout tracks, which are going to be downstairs as well. So don't come back up here after lunch. You will hear it coming over the tannoy. It will say to go into your breakout track. Your breakout tracks are on the back of your name tag. If you haven't got one, speak to a NashTech colleague or to the people at registration, and they will allocate you a breakout track. Then come back here. We've got some fantastic sessions on AI maximalism and also AI delivery excellence, and we've got 2 magical sessions at the end. One is literally magical. We've got a magician who uses AI all around the world and across the West End in award-winning illusions. So please don't miss that. However, if you do have to leave at lunch, which we hope you're not going to, we do have some goodie bags that you can take. But please don't take them unless you're leaving, because otherwise they'll just get dropped all over the place. So we really hope to see you back here after your lunch and your breakout sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you.